Hello Potters, I want to talk to you today about how to trim a bowl. This is meant for my students who have taken a class from me in my studio, and if you haven't worked with me before, it may make some sense, and again maybe it won't. It's meant more of as a review than brand new information. So my name's Stacey McDonald, and I own Stacey McDonald Pottery Studio in Freeport, Illinois. I offer classes and open studio and memberships, and please come down and see me if you're in Freeport. So what I have today is tools we're going to need: needle tool, sponge with some water, and 2 trimming tools, and I also use a polished rock. I'm going to set these out of the way. Here's the bowl that I'm going to trim. And it is leather hard, and how I test to see if it's a good trimming dryness is down here in the bottom, this is what I'm going to trim. So up here I'm not so worried about it, but down here I want to be able to press on it, and you can see as I press I'm not leaving a fingerprint. But if I were to put my fingernail in there, I can easily leave a mark, and it feels like chocolate or cheese, and that tells me that it's a good trimming consistency. So chances are you've thrown a bowl or a mug or whatever you're going to trim, and it's been a few days while it dries out, and you may have forgotten what it felt like, where it's thick, where it's thin. So let's get familiar with the pot. First I want to feel the walls, and I'm going to feel down the wall until it starts to get thick. And for many of us that's in the bottom half of the pot. And where it starts to get thick, I want to hold my finger on the inside of the pot, and then on the outside of the pot with the needle tool perpendicular to the wall of the pot, I'm going to push it through until it touches my finger, and then pull it out, and I get to see how thick that is. Now, I don't do this anymore for my pots, but if I had learned this when I first started trimming back as a beginner, I would have trimmed through far fewer pots. So if you're a practiced or accomplished thrower and you've been trimming for a long time and you don't trim through your pots anymore, don't do this. But if you're brand new, or if you find that you're trimming through pots, or that you have weight left behind after you trim, you're not happy with this, it might really help you out, getting just the right amount of clay off your pots. So now I know that I'm starting to get thick here, and I can trim everything from here up. Then I want to set the pot down, and I want to check the thickness in the center of the pot. So I'm going to go through to the wheel, bring my tool out, and I have about 1/4 of an inch in the bottom down there, so I can trim a foot. Then the last thing I want to do is go through and decide where I'm going to put my foot. So when your pot, when you think about putting a foot on your pot, you want to have it wide enough that it's not going to be tippy on the table. You don't want it to fall over and spill. You also don't want it so wide that the center of the bowl is going to touch the table or the kiln shelf. So where I like to put the foot is straddling the line where the wall of the pot turns into the floor of the pot. So I'm going to look at that curve in here, and right in the middle of that curve, I'm going to take my tool and put it straight through to the bottom of the pot. And then make sure that I can see it on the bottom. There it is. So here's where I'm going to put my foot. I'm just going to straddle that line. So now that I've got a good idea of where the material is that I'm going to carve away, I can take away everything from here down, and I'm going to carve away the center here to make a foot. I know how thick this is in the center. Now I'm going to turn the wheel on and get this pot centered on the wheel. I just had to step away to get myself a coil. So I'm going to visually center it on the wheel. Then I want to center this part that I'm going to be trimming. Sometimes our rim can be a little off center. I'm not worried about that. I want to get this part as centered as possible so that when I trim, I get a nice even thickness in my walls. So I'm going to turn my wheel on slowly. And with my needle tool, I'm going to approach the pot slowly. And then it leaves a scratch on the wheel, or sorry, on the pot. My scratch goes from here to here. So in the middle of that line, I'm going to push the pot towards the center, just a little bit. So here's my line again from here to here. I'm going to push it towards the center, in the center of that line. And what I'm looking for is when I touch the pot with my needle tool, it cuts or scores almost all the way around. So I'm pretty good there. I'm looking for good enough. I'm not looking for perfect. So once I have my pot centered the way I like it, then I'm going to take a fat coil of clay, just a little firmer than what I would normally throw with. I don't want it sticky, I don't want it really soft, but I don't want it so hard that it's going to just pop off the wheel. I'm going to take a couple or three pieces here. Of course, the larger your piece, the more coils you're going to use. I'm just using 3 because it's a good size for this pot. I'm going to hold the pot in place. I want to put the coil up against the pot and press it down towards the wheel. And notice, can you see that it just snugs up against the pot and holds the pot in place? I don't want to push the coil towards the pot because sometimes my walls are a little flexible and I don't want to distort my pot. I'm going to go all the way around. I'm holding the pot in place, put the coil up against the pot, press it down with my thumb. And now that's in place, it's not going to move. So now I'm going to get my wheel going fairly quickly. The first tool I'm going to use is this pear-shaped loop tool. I'm going to hold the fat part of the handle in the palm of my hand and grip it. I'm going to extend my index finger to support the tool. I'm going to brace my arms, and right now I'm on the splash pan, or if I was at a seated wheel, I would be bracing my arms on my legs. Then I'm going to slowly approach the pot with the tool and allow it to begin cutting. Now it's important here that we don't allow the tool to do this around the pot while we're cutting. We want to make a symmetrical bottom. So I just want to cut and get rid of that rough edge. And once I have a nice symmetrical bottom, now I'm going to change tools. I'm going to use my small loop tool. And I like using the square end of my loop tool. I'm going to hold it in my hand like a writing instrument with the end flat, and I'm going to put the end flat down on top of the pot. So where I'm going to start next is I'm going to set the tool down on the outside line of where my foot's going to be. I always brace my right hand with my left so that I have enough stability. Put that down and start trimming. And when the clay comes off in big streamers like that, you know that you've got a really good moisture content. I want to go down about 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to stop the wheel, and now you can see that I have a vertical edge on the outside of my foot, and then I have this horizontal ledge. I want to take that and blend it into my pot. And remember, I've got a lot of thickness here that I can trim away. So this really reveals the pot at this point. We started with a fairly clunky, heavy looking bottomed piece of pottery, and now I'm going to give it this nice roundness, but I want to make sure I don't go too far. So one of the things that I can do to kind of monitor my thickness while the pot is connected to the wheel, let me turn it off so you can hear it, is I can tap the pot. So I know that that's about 1/4 of an inch thick. That's a lower tone than this. So this sounds to me like it's thicker than this is. So I know that I can take away quite a bit of material. Can you hear that really high tone down here? Remember when I was feeling the top half of my pot and I said that's the thickness that I want, I don't want to change it? So that tone is what I want to continue throughout the entire pot. So can you hear it change? I'm hoping the video picks up on that change. So as you're working on your pot, frequently stop and do some tapping. Your ear will learn what that means as far as the thickness of your pot. If you ever tap your pot and the pot flexes, you're done trimming. If you trim any more, you're going to trim through your pot. So let's keep going. Again, going fairly quickly, holding the tool in the palm of my hand, extending my index finger to support it, bracing my right hand with my left. I'm going to approach the pot and start trimming. And I'm just going to take that ledge of clay and blend that into the body of the pot. And I really feel like it doesn't make any difference which side of the tool you use, whether you start with the fat side or the skinny side. You give it a try and see if you prefer a certain way. So that's blended in. I'm happy with that. And the last thing I want to do to the outside of this foot is I want to cut a little bit of a groove where the foot meets the wall of the pot, and that will give my glaze somewhere to flow into. I like to use layered glaze that tends to move sometimes. So if I have a little bit of a groove there, it slows down the glaze flow, and sometimes it'll prevent my pot from sticking to the wheel or the kiln shelf. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go use this flat end, and I'm going to hold it vertically this time, and then I'm just going to tuck that bottom corner in under the outside edge of the foot and give myself a little bit of a groove and then blend it in. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to start trimming the inside of the foot. And what I want to do is always cut with the bottom corner of my tool. I'm going to hold the tool vertically and cut with just the bottom corner, because I find that if I use too much of the tool on the inside here, the clay will grab the tool and pull it outwards, and I'll end up gouging my pot. So just with the bottom corner, I'm going to go in and define that inside of my foot, that inside line. Then I'm going to start trimming in the center with the, again, bottom corner of the tool. And you see how it gives me peaks and valleys. So I'm going to do that again, just take a little bit more material away. And then once I have those peaks, I can use my tool flat and just go along and take the tops of those peaks off. Now I want to follow the contour of the inside side of my pot on the outside. So if the inside of my bottom is curved like this, I want the outside of the bottom to be curved like this. That means that I need to carve a little deeper here than I do here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to ride along in the middle and then press my outside corner down a little bit further as I get out towards the edge of the foot. Now while the width of this foot is good for this size of bowl, I feel like this is a little too meaty, a little too thick. So now I'm going to switch to the curved end of my trimming tool, and I'm just going to cut out a little bit on the inside of that foot. And that just gets rid of a little bit of that weight, both visually and physically when you're holding the bowl. So I'm pretty happy with that. Let's stop it. Are you able to hear that my tapping sounds are very, very consistent from the bottom to the top? That's what I'm looking for. But you can see that the edges of this foot are very sharp. I want to go ahead and just round those off. You never want to have a sharp edge on the bottom of a pot. It'll scratch the table. Plus it's unpleasant to handle when someone is picking it up and washing it. Just get the crumblies out of there. So we're getting close to being done with our pot, but there's a lot of finishing details we need to consider now. So I hope that you can see that the trimmed surface of the pot is a different texture than the thrown surface. If you can't see it, you'll just have to believe me. This is a stoneware that has some grog in it, so as I'm trimming, the trimming tools are grabbing these little pieces of grog that are very much like miniature gravel, and they're either popping them out of the clay, leaving a void, or they're holding onto it and scratching the clay. So I have a combination of scratch lines and little pock marks in the clay. The glaze is going to sit differently on the trimmed area of the pot than it will on the thrown surface, and that's not usually attractive. The little voids in the clay are going to create air bubbles under your glaze, which can cause glaze defects. And also, you know, it's just often will just give a different texture under the glaze. So unless you are wanting to do that on purpose, we need to get rid of that surface. We need to close those pores on the clay. So this is where I like to use my stone. So I'm going to get my wheel going again. I want a very well wrung out sponge, so not a lot of water in it at all. I'm going to add a little bit of water to the surface of the clay, not very much. We're not wetting the pot, we're just giving a little bit of water to the surface so that those fine particles of clay will move and fill in those voids. So next I'm going to take my stone. I'm just going to clean off a little bit of the dried clay. I'm going to take my polished stone. You can also use your finger, a rib, the back of a spoon, whatever works for you. I'm going to take whatever surface feels good to me when I'm holding the stone. I'm going to put it up against my pot, and I can feel where the burnishing is working. I'm going to stop it and see if you can tell the difference. Like from above, I don't know if you can see the difference between the burnished area and the not burnished area, but all of those pock marks have disappeared and we almost have a sheen on the clay. So the pores are closed and our glaze is going to sit on there nicely. Go all the way up to the foot. Smooth off the foot. And different surfaces of my stone are going to give me different shapes. So for instance, this curved area, I can go in and burnish the curve on the inside of my foot. And just give it a tidy up with my fingers. So I'm going to visually inspect it and make sure I'm happy with it. There's just a couple of scratches there I want to kind of fill in with my finger. They were deeper than what was able to be burnished with the rock. I have what looks like a little bit of smuts that got stuck in there, so I'm going to take my fingernail. Yep, it was just a little bit of trimming. And get that out of there. Burnish that to get rid of that evidence. So now I'm happy with my trimming job. I'm going to remove my lugs of clay. And you can reuse these a few times until they get too full of dried trimming scraps. As long as it's nice and soft and supple, you can keep using it for trimming. So now I'm going to inspect the rest of the bowl. I'm going to look at my rim and see if there's any areas that need to be addressed. Sometimes you end up with a little bit of a ding in your rim that you want to just kind of smooth over. Do not, especially with stoneware, you can do it with porcelain. Porcelain you can sponge all day long and you'll never end up with a rough surface. But if your stoneware has any grit in it or any coarse clay or any grog, if you start sponging, you're going to take away the fine particles of clay and expose the grog, and it'll end up very rough and gravelly. And the glaze won't smooth it over. The glaze will just allow the grog to come through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a well wrung out sponge and just moisten my finger on it and burnish any rough areas. This is the time to be smoothing out your pot. If you wait until your pot is bone dry or your pot has been bisque fired and you start to smooth it out, then you may be creating dust. Right now it's leather hard. Anything I do to it is not going to create dust. Okay. So then once I've addressed the outside of the pot, I'm going to look at the inside of the pot and notice that I still have these holes that I created earlier. I'm also going to be looking for air bubbles. If I have an air bubble in my pot, I want to break it open and put clay in there. Contrary to popular mythology or lore, bubbles do not make pots explode. But what can happen in the glaze firing, if you have a bubble in the wall of your pot, that means that there's a void with a very thin membrane of clay over top of it, and your glaze can eat through that, and you'll end up with an open hole in your pot. So anytime you find an air bubble, always break it open and fill it with clay. So right now what I'm going to do is take a little bit of my clay from my lugs and roll a really tiny little coil. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip the coil in the water, and then I want to shove it in the hole that I've made, and then go in there and break it off. And then using a moistened finger, I go in and just smooth that out, and you'll never know that anything was ever going on there. So I'm going to do that with the hole in the center. Hopefully that method prevents you from trimming through the bottoms of your pots. Where I came through the side, that's kind of closed over. I don't know if you can see it. It's right there, and that's where I tested the thickness of my pot on the side. So that's kind of what an air bubble would look like too. It just looks like a little pimple. So I go in there and just break that open. And then again, use that tiny little coil of soft clay, stick it in the hole, and then go ahead and smooth it. You'll never know anything was ever there. So once I'm happy with the surface of my pot, I'm happy with the trimming, there's no flaws that I need to address, then my pot is ready to go over to the bisque cart. You want to sign the bottom of your pot, and in this studio we weigh our trimmed pots and write the weight on the firing slip along with our name and the date, and then it'll get fired and we can turn it into a beautiful glazed pot pretty soon. Thanks so much for watching.